I'm ready to go.
All right, I think we're recording, and here we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Wonky Weekly.
I'm Rashaan James II.
And I'm Sid Solomon. It's gonna be Wonkerific.
Nope, terrible. Actually, no, not that terrible, actually. I was like, where's this going? But
I wanted something perfect. I really thought you might like that.
I don't hate it. I don't hate it.
All right. Well, hi, Rashaan.
Hello, Sid.
Now that we've gotten that out of the way, today, this is going to be a really exciting episode. We're doing something new, both in what we're talking about and how we're going to talk about it. So first of all, Rashaan, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about elections, but like generally about elections, not about specifically about elections.
After our auditions episode and talking about chorus, I was really hoping you were going to sing it again. You're going to sing elections, but I guess no, we don't sing about elections. All right. So yes, we're talking very broadly about elections today, and we have a guest for the very first time. Rashaan, would you like to introduce our guest?
Absolutely. She's one of my favorite human beings ever. Ruth E. Kramer, who is a counselor right now, a stage manager counselor, is with us. Ruth, are you there? Are you there? Are you there? Are you there? Ah! Yay! Hi, Ruth. Welcome to Wonky Weekly.
Hi, Rashaan. Hi, Sid. Thank you.
Is there anything more exciting than Ruth Kramer coming into a room and Ruth Kramer joining the conversation? That's my standard. Like Ruth walks into a room and that's how I respond. That's pretty basic. That's baseline. So hi, Ruth.
Both very sweet and very terrible.
So hi, Ruth, and welcome to Wonky Weekly. First of all, tell us where you are joining us from today.
I'm joining you from beautiful Fort Myers, Florida, where I'm working at the Florida Repertory Theater.
Do us a favor and just tell us a little bit about yourself and like your experience in equity governance.
Okay, well, today happens to be my 39th anniversary as an equity member. I signed my first equity contract and applied on this date, 2/28/1983. About 4 years later, in 1987, I joined my first committee, and it was, you can call it downhill or uphill from there, take your pick. I joined more committees over the years, and then eventually in 2005, I ran for council, and I've been an Eastern Region stage manager counselor for 17 years. I'm the past chair of 2 committees, vice chair of several committees, and have really enjoyed my time in governance.
Rashaan, can you talk about your experience meeting Ruth Kramer?
Oh, my very first meeting, and I don't know if you actually remember, Ruth. The first time we met was on a break in ERB, and we were on a break, and I was like, "Hi," and she was like, "Hey," and I was like, "Hi, I'm Rashaan." She's like, "I'm Ruth," and it was like, the all-encompassing warmth around you of Ruth Kramer, and like Ruth and I have been pretty like good friends, and like she's a confidant and has led me through a bunch of things. Also, Ruth is the person who put me on my first committee. She put me as my first vice chair ever on my first negotiating team. So like Ruth put trust in me right away, which is crazy. But she turned out to be like a very like integral path of my learning at equity to be as wonky as I am.
Mm-hmm. And Rashaan, without knowing that story, I asked because I assume you had one, because it's not dissimilar from mine. I mean, Ruth reached out to me for the first time while I was running for council for the first time back in 2015. She had never met me. I assume she'd never heard of me. And this will shock you, Rashaan. You weren't around when I ran for council that first time. I was running my mouth a little bit. Like I was talking a lot, as is the way. And Ruth was the first person on the council to reach out to me and say, I would like to meet you and get to know who you are. And so we went and we had coffee and we sat down, and she was the first person who engaged with me, just saying, you seem interesting. You seem like you have a lot to say. Let me learn from you, and maybe you can learn from me. And from then, Ruth Kramer, like you said, has been a confidant and a mentor and a sparring partner. Like there are so few people in the world where if they disagree with me, it stops me in my tracks. Even if we end up on the opposite side of an issue, on the opposite side of a vote, knowing that Ruth is there and that I can ask her, hey, what are you seeing that I am not, has been such a valuable resource for me. So I could not think of anybody better to have as our first guest on Wonky Weekly, and especially when it comes to talking about elections. Ruth, you mentioned you've been a chair of some committees at Equity, and one of the committees that you have been a chair of is Equity's Election Procedures Committee. So can you talk about your time on the Election Procedures Committee and how you ended up being chair and for how long you did that?
I first joined the Election Procedures Committee as just a member of the committee because I was very interested in how our elections work, which is why I joined most of my committees originally to know. K-N-O-W, to know. It wasn't until I actually joined my first and second committee that I realized I could affect as well as just learn and know. So I joined the Election Procedures Committee because it seemed like time for me to get involved in more of the process of governance. And I was a member for several years, and then Brian Myers Cooper invited me to be one of his vice chairs. And then when Brian, I don't remember if he resigned or if it was one of the short times he was not on council, when he was no longer there, I became the chair of the committee. I think I was the chair of the committee for about 8 or 9 years, maybe 7 or 8, but around there. Been through several election cycles, had the difficult conversations with the members of the committee and then with council about those election procedures in every cycle, and then culminating in the tabulation day, which can be very nerve-wracking even when you're not running, I have discovered.
Awesome. You know, I don't know if members know exactly what election procedures does. They kind of have an idea of it, but will you give us like a rundown of like what happens before an election, what happens perhaps after and during an election, and like how the committee functions?
Okay, that's a big ask. The Election Procedures Committee is in charge of coming up with all the processes for the election. Our elections, since they are union elections, are covered by federal labor law, so we have to work within federal labor law, and the committee also has to work within our own constitution and bylaws, whether we like it or not. So the committee meets, and usually several times before the elections take place, to look at past election procedures and nominating policies, and go through there to discuss what worked, what didn't work, what we'd like to change, and what we'd like to change but we can't change because of federal labor law, constitution, and bylaws. So that preparation discusses everything from what the qualifications are to run to how many words you can write in your statement, and whether a hashtag is more than one word or whether a hashtag is one word, or whether a URL is more than one word or is only a single word. So we go from the minuscule back up to the really broad issues, which are that unions need to make it as easy as possible for the most members possible to run for offices. So that is our many meetings before we come up with a document of election procedures and nominating policies. Then it goes to council, where there is another, usually longish debate, so that the people who are not on the Election Procedures Committee get their so-called bite at the apple as well, and can ask, why did you decide this? Why did you decide that? I don't agree with this. Here is my argument, and maybe amend some of the policies that the committee came up with. And council has the final say by voting on what the unamended or amended policies will be. Then staff makes up the documents that are necessary, and at the date chosen by the committee, because the committee also comes up with the election calendar, the materials are made available for candidates, and we're off and running. In terms of what happens during the election process, the committee itself is pretty quiet during that process. Although there is an appeals committee, it's not named that, but if there are things that happen during the campaigns or during the time the ballots are out themselves, that there is a smaller group of people who can adjudicate concerns in that matter.
That's called the Elections Compliance Committee. They are actually not a part of the Election Procedures Committee. They are a standalone committee that only exists during the election. They are people who don't have anything vested in the election so that they can make a nonpartisan decision in case there's an appeal for that. Last election, we had 4, and then it actually went down to 3 because one person was like, hey, vote for this person, and we can't have someone do that while they're on the Elections Compliance Committee. So it is built during the election by council. Council makes it, and then it is dissolved after the election. That is the only time that committee stands.
That committee, the Election Compliance Committee, also works on tabulation night. They worked almost till 3 or 4 in the morning at the last election, going through election results with our lawyer, Susan Davis. So they have one big evening so that the votes can become certified or legal. Following the Election Procedures Committee meets for a debrief generally so that it can get on record while memory is still fresh, the things they'd like to discuss prior to the next election cycle.
So Ruth, we have said that equity elections and really all union officer elections need to be conducted according to 2 sets of rules. There are the union's own rules, and in equity's case, that is the union's constitution, the union's bylaws, and then any and all council rules that have been passed. But there's also the law. There's federal law. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Ruth. I'm going to give you a little trivia question. The primary law, the primary federal law that governs union officer elections is called the LMRDA. Can you tell us what the LMRDA stands for?
Don't do this to me, Sid. No, I can't.
Well, for anybody who might not know, LMRDA stands for the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure.
Thank you.
Yes.
Act of 1959.
And it is a piece of federal law that was originally passed in 1959 that has lots of stipulations about how unions run their officer elections. And Rashaan and I talked about this in an earlier episode, what an officer of a union, small o officer is. It is the governing body of the union is made up of its officers. So at Equity, that is all 83 seats on the National Council. All of them are officers. And these are the elections during which we elect the members of the National Council. So can you talk to us, Ruth, about some of the things, obviously not all of them, but some of the things in federal law that affect our elections at Equity? What are some of the things that we have to do to keep in compliance with the law, and ways in which those laws are helpful, in your opinion, and some ways in which they are less so?
Sure. The first one I've mentioned before, of course, that the union must make it as easy as possible for the most members to be able to run for seats. So the qualifications to run can't be, you must have done this job for 15 years in a row without a break, because that's impossible, certainly in our union, possibly in many others. So the requirements to run have to be low. I believe ours right now, you have to be a member in good standing and have been a member in good standing for at least 2 years and not in conflict of interest. Those are the basic qualifications. There are some more qualifications for work, but I imagine you will get to that in your further detailed episodes that you do. So that's the big one. One of the other laws is the union cannot help you with your campaign or your running or whatever you do to get elected. They cannot help you in any manner. They cannot give you money. They cannot afford you office space. You cannot hand out your flyers on union premises. That also includes employers. One cannot use any employer resources to benefit your campaign. In other words, you can't campaign in the green room to your cast because you're on the employer's property. You can't photocopy anything on your employer's photocopy machine that you're going to hand out to your cast or others. You can't post something on your call board about your campaign. And that goes for any employer. If your sister runs a hair salon, you can't take money from her because she's an employer. You can't take that money to get your flyers printed. So employers cannot help you campaign. Now, you certainly can go to Kinko's and pay for those things to be printed. Yes, Kinko's has employees, but you're paying your share. You cannot record a campaign video from a rehearsal studio or a office of an employer where you might be working. Again, you're using the employer's resources for that video if you do. So those are the real big ones, and those are some of the traps people tend to fall into.
All right. So Ruth, as you were just explaining the fact that members can't use employer resources to help run their elections, some of those specific instances you used felt kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of ticky-tacky. Like, who cares? Why should we care?
We should care because we can't have employers influencing our election in any way. We can't have an employer that says, yes, I'm going to do A, B, and C for you so you will get elected and then do what I want once you're elected. It's very important for our employers to have no influence over us when we are officers of the union. Obviously, there are two sides to every issue that comes up, the employer's side and our side, but we can't be under any financial obligation or moral obligation as individuals to that employer. So it's both practical and philosophical. And it's when you get into philosophical that it becomes less ticky-tacky.
So I do have a question for you, Ruth, and it's one that happens like a lot during the election cycle. People ask, well, why are we not using technology? Why does Equity mail the ballots out every year?
So by technology, what I'm assuming you mean, Rashaan, is an email ballot. Something done via technology that way, either on your phone or your device, or a URL ballot where you click a link. Federal labor law prohibits unions from doing that. There was a case that decided that because the count of those ballots, the tabulation is not observable, and every single person running has a right to observe the count if they can afford to get where the count is happening, they have the right to do that. But you can't observe a computer tallying things as they come in. I hope that changes in the future. I hope labor law changes in the future to support it, but that hasn't happened yet.
And just to be clear, what we're talking about, the change that was made, the court case that Ruth is referring to, was not a change in the statute. It was not a change to the LMRDA. It was a federal judge's interpretation of the law, which has a binding effect on how the law is practically enforceable. So back when I first ran for council in 2015, and Rashaan, I believe when you first ran for council in 2016, we offered electronic balloting as an option in council elections. Yes. We were able to, you could choose either to return a paper ballot or to vote online. And when that federal ruling came down, Equity, along with all other labor unions in the United States, had to change their practices for their officer elections if they had been in any way doing electronic balloting.
So Sid used the word ticky-tacky for some of the things. Like, so let's say I decide to show up to Equity and I make photocopies that say, vote for Rashaan. And someone says, wait, Rashaan was on an employer site and used employer resources. What happens to our election then?
It goes through a process to decide whether Rashaan did actually violate union election policy or not. And I believe that also goes to the Election Compliance committee to decide?
So two things. What happens a lot in my experience, and like Rashaan, I've run in a number of different council elections, same thing with Ruth, all of us have experience running as candidates, is that when a member, whether they are a candidate or not, sees what they think is a violation of the election rules, very often what they do is they will call the union's staff. They will call the union staff and they will say, I think somebody's violating the election rules. And they think that by doing that, whoever is on the union's election staff is empowered to or will contact that candidate and say, knock it off. When in fact, that's not the remedy to the problem. And that's really important to know. First and foremost, let's say this. If you run for council, or if you are assisting somebody in running for council, or if you are in any way involved in a council election, follow the rules. Follow the rules. Follow the rules. Please follow the rules. It's for everybody's well-being that you do so. Because if you do in fact violate the rules, the remedy isn't that you call up somebody on the staff and they will say, stop it. The remedy is that you have to file a complaint when the process is over and say, I believe because somebody violated the rules, whether that is a candidate, a member, an employer who is not a member, or anybody might have violated these rules. And then you say, I believe because the rules were violated, because perhaps the law was violated, it affected the outcome of the election. And that's a really, really important distinction. And that is something that an election compliance committee would have to look at. Not only was a rule violated, not only potentially was the law violated, but did it have a significant enough effect that
Yes.
you would have to determine that because of that effect, it would only be fair to rerun the election. So this is where the work of the election compliance committee is really important and really challenging. And I am somewhat thankful I've never had to serve on one. Because if the question is posed to you first, was a rule or was a law violated? If the answer is yes, the second question posed is, did it have a substantive effect on the election? Then, if you believe the answer is yes, but you rule, we don't want to have to deal with rerunning the election, so we're just going to say, no, it probably didn't have an effect. If the person who lodged the complaint then takes the complaint to the federal government and says, I brought it to the election compliance committee, they said it didn't have an effect, but I think it did. If the government then finds that a rule or a law was violated and it did have a plausible effect on the election, then, as Ruth said before, the federal government will mandate that the election be rerun. Whether it is whether part of it is rerun, whether the entirety of it is rerun, whether it is rerun by the union itself, or whether the federal government takes control and runs it for us. All of those are possibilities. So that's Wonky, and that's what we do here, but all going towards saying, follow the rules.
I will add to that for just a second.
Please.
When the nominations and elections policies come out, everyone who is a candidate, don't just download them, read them, highlight them, go back and read them again. And if you have a loved one who is also a union member or wants to help you with your campaign in any way, then they must read it and highlight it and look at it carefully. Mistakes could be deadly, as Sid and Rashaan have both described, and very, very costly for the union above and beyond the cost of running the election in the first place. So be responsible and know not only what you're getting into if you get elected to an officer position, but what you're getting into by agreeing to run in the first place.
All right. I want to talk about union elections more broadly, and I'm interested to know what you think about this, Ruth. Do you know of ways in which the way Equity runs its elections is substantively different from the way that other unions run their elections? Now, obviously, all unions have to follow the same federal laws. We're talking about American unions here. But are there differences between the rules that Equity constructs that are particularly notable to you in your experience?
I am not a member of another union, so I've never voted in another union election. But because I'm a member of Equity, I've heard a lot from members of SAG-AFTRA. And one significant difference is Equity will publish a statement that each candidate makes. Equity will use their webpage to equally publish a short statement by each candidate. The rules for the statements are the same for every candidate. SAG-AFTRA, as I understand, does not offer any opportunity to do anything for the candidates. You're running, you're completely on your own. SAG-AFTRA won't publish your picture, SAG-AFTRA won't publish a statement. I believe they are still required to have a list of eligible candidates that come up after their nominating procedure, whatever that is finished. But Equity is a little more liberal, just by a touch in that respect.
Something I hear from members a lot is that they sometimes feel like they're lacking for information about candidates. And they see part of Equity's election rules every year is not just that a statement can be put in, it used to be in the paper version of the Equity News, and now it's put on the website. But there are limitations on the number of words that are available. So, sometimes it has been 250 words, sometimes it's 275. And what I will often hear from members is, why aren't candidates given more opportunity to express themselves? Now, I'm going to offer an opinion here, and I'm actually really interested to hear from both of you about how you feel about this. First of all, like Ruth said, sort of an underpinning sort of philosophy of union elections is that the union itself as an institution is not supposed to be assisting anybody. The union institutionally should not certainly have a favorite in terms of who wins a seat to this office or who doesn't. I don't think that publishing statements and everybody having the same number of words is in any way showing favor, but it is the union institutionally saying that it has some responsibility to educate members about their candidates. Whereas I think the philosophy of other unions, and frankly, the philosophy that I personally have and would prefer, is that one of the things you should be looking for in your candidates, and eventually in the people you elect to be your officers, is the capacity to communicate with membership. Not needing the union to afford you 275 words on the website or in Equity News, but rather saying, if I'm going to be an effective officer and am going to be in constant communication with the people I represent, I'm going to have to demonstrate that skill during the course of this election. So I don't necessarily want, or nor do I feel like I should need as a candidate, the union to afford me space or worry about how much they limit me to. I'm going to spend every waking moment of an election finding ways in which to communicate with members and then learning those communication pathways so I can then keep them open if and when I am elected. That is the philosophy, whether implicit or explicit, that other unions use. They leave it to the candidates to communicate their beliefs, their histories, their biographies, their passions, their goals to the candidates themselves. And so I don't think it's a deficiency that Equity allows statements, but I do think it encourages the thinking, well, if it makes people think that it's then Equity's job. And then in only allowing 275 words, that Equity is in fact limiting people's communications, when in fact Equity is giving something to candidates that most unions would say, do it on your own, folks. But I'm really interested to hear if this is a place where you agree or not. Ruth, yeah.
I like the idea of us as candidates showing that we can interact with our union members. This was wholly different when I first ran in 2005. It wasn't completely pre-social media. Facebook did exist at that point, but social media wasn't used the way it is used now, and certainly there was no TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, etc. at that point. So back when the statements were only printed in the Equity News, which went out once a month, and at elections went out with a very hefty center section that was just candidate statements, where unless you knew that person or were able to access their long-distance phone number or were able to write them a snail mail letter, You could not communicate with them, nor did they have to prove they were capable or interested in communicating with the membership. I don't see the union being responsible for it at all. We have the capability now to reach out to our members or to respond if our members reach out to us. And I absolutely think it's our responsibility, not the union's job, to do that for us. There may be people who have members vote for them on reputation alone, who don't have to be asked questions and don't have to put themselves out there, or don't want to and say, I'm running on my reputation and my record alone, and I'm not going to engage. And because we have so many voters from all over the country, they could still win that candidate who is not going to engage during an election. But we do have the means to do that now. And I hope each candidate will put themselves out there to allow people to ask them questions.
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to say that it is fact, it is not opinion, that by equity allowing the 250 words, I think that's what it is this year, it is not hamstringing, it is actually additional outside of what any other union does. That's not, we are outliers completely when it comes to AGMA, SAG, our sister unions, AGMA, SAG, SAG-AFTRA, AGBA. They do not do that at all. You get a list of names, and that's it. So the union is actually filling in a blank where it is not required to. That is a fact. And I think sometimes when it gets misconstrued that we're not giving enough information, this is my opinion, is that we are not getting enough information because elections in the past have not been about the way that people communicate, how they would govern. It was specifically about recognition of the person. People were voted for because of the fact that people knew who they were. We have a certain amount of star status inside of our union where if a name goes on a ballot, and this is not just Actors Equity, this is any ballot anywhere. You know, I just helped run a campaign in a local election, and it's the same thing. If someone gets to the ballot, and they see a name that they know, it's very different from a name that they don't know. Mm-hmm. And they will vote for the name that they know. And because of our star statuses in our union, lots of that has happened in the past years. So the responsibility is on the individual to go out and do the broadcasting of this is who I am and how I communicate. It is not Actors Equity's responsibility to say, hey, we'll allow you to do your broadcasting on some platform. 250 words is more than enough, and it is a benefit that that the union does not have to give, that I personally I feel is okay, because it does fill in some of the deficit between someone who might just be running off the cuff and a star who might be in the same category as they are.
Very quickly, I'm going to give Ruth, maybe this is an opportunity for you to redeem yourself in a trivia challenge. Rashaan just mentioned our sister unions. He mentioned SAG-AFTRA. He mentioned AGMA, the American Guild of Musical Artists. He mentioned AGBA, the American Guild of Variety Artists. Ruth, can you name the last and final and perhaps my favorite of Equity's sister unions?
SAG-AFTRA, AGMA. You're putting me on the spot.
AGVA, I already said. There's one more.
It's tiny. It's tiny.
Yeah, tiny. Yeah. I'm going through them in my head, and I can't believe you're doing this to me. It's the Hebrew Union.
Close. Close. So close. So close. It is the Guild of Italian American.
Italian?
Gia. Sorry. Anytime somebody mentions this,
I do know all this. I do know all this, but it's so far back on the hard drive that there wasn't enough time to call it into RAM.
If anybody is concerned that we are, pre-preparing our guests and telling them exactly what we're going to ask, this is proof that, none of this is scripted. I will also just mention, Ruth talked about social media and how now, because candidates have a technological capability to communicate very broadly with members, not just in their locality, but across the country, that all the more reason that we should rely on candidates themselves to get the word out. I think it's worth noting, though, that historically, even before social media, most unions would not publish information about the candidates themselves other than their names. And the method by which candidates would get information out about themselves to the electorate would typically be through the formation of slates. Different candidates running would join together based on any number of things that they had in common, typically having shared goals or political aims for the union, and then they would share resources. Many unions have groups of people and candidates who run together and share resources as a means of informing the electorate. If you believe in this set of values, you might consider voting for this set of candidates. But I thought it was worth mentioning that in terms of getting the word out about candidates, it is very often slates that do that lifting for candidates in other unions. That is generally assumed to be the best practice.
We talk about only having a 250 word or 275 word statement. There is nothing to keep a candidate from in that statement saying, here is my webpage. I talk a whole lot more there. And then posting every day on every topic they'd like to talk about. So if a candidate limits themselves, they are limiting themselves. There are other ways other than web pages of putting opinions forward as well, opinions and goals. To Sid's point, I live in Manhattan Plaza when I'm in New York. I've lived there almost 30 years, and every year at SAG elections, I get postcards under my door with slates. So I'm not a SAG-AFTRA member or voter, so generally I'll glance at it and it goes right in the shredder. But what Sid is saying is true.
I want to get a shirt that says that. What Sid is saying is true. Ruth Kramer. That's just...
In the back of the shirt will say, not.
Ruth, is there anything else that you think members should know very broadly about elections? Again, we'll do a more detailed look at this year's rules and procedures. But is there anything that we missed today?
I just would appeal to our membership. If you are inclined to run, when the materials become available, download them and read them. Make your decision then. Don't make your decision before you see what it is you will have to do to run a campaign. Again, with the good and the bad, the more people that run, the better, quite frankly, because the more choice we all have for who will lead us as equity members.
I don't believe in uncontested races because I don't believe that they are democratic. So anyone out there, run. Why not? Because that's what makes things democratic, because we get to see what voters actually want instead of just ticking a name because it's the only one there. March 16th is the date that we will start to see that elections are happening. The candidate packets will go out. Sid and I will do another episode where we really break down that packet because it's quite thick. And this year what we've done is the election packet also will include the election rules, which is really great. Kim Huber is the new chair of election procedures. And the committee and Kim decided that it would be really great to get the rules in the same place of how to be a candidate. How about it? So that's really awesome. And now we have it all in one place. So Sid and I will break all those things down because we don't want any of the tiny little mistakes or the ticky-tacky mistakes to happen.
Well, I'll also just add, if you are watching this, if you are an equity member and you are interested in running for council, but you don't know what that looks like, or you're unsure about your decision, right here on this screen, you have a current stage manager counselor, a current chorus counselor, a former principal counselor, as well as a former officer of the union with a capital O. Reach out to us. Go to wonkyweekly.com, click the contact link. If you would like to talk to any of us, I'm volunteering you, Ruth, but if you'd like to talk to any of us about our experience as counselors and running for council, all of us would be happy to talk to you. And while Rashaan and Ruth and I are all from the Eastern region, if you live in Equity's Western region or Central region and are interested in running and would like to talk to somebody with experience running in one of those regions, reach out to us. We will put you in touch with people. We know a lot of folks who have served on council, who have run for council, both currently and in the past. And just again, wonkyweekly.com, check it out. You can find all of our episodes, information about myself and Rashaan, and of course, again, the opportunity to contact us and ask us any questions you might have and tell us what you think and what you'd like to see us cover on future episodes.
I wanted to make sure that before we go, we actually say thank you to Ruth. This has been awesome. And like, you are our first guest. So this was a trial by fire. Welcome to Wonky Weekly. It is super wonky.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this, even though I failed trivia, which I'm actually quite good at, and do play trivia when I can. So next time, trivia I can handle, please, gents.
All right. So how about now, Rashaan? Do you think we've covered everything we need to today?
I think we have. Yes.
All right. So thank you so much again to Ruth E. Kramer. And thank you all for watching this week's episode of Wonky Weekly. I'm Sid Solomon.
I'm Rashaan James II.
And I'm going to do better next week. It's going to happen. It's not. No chance.
Bye.
Thanks everyone.